Fellas, considering only one ranked lightweight right now actually has a fight booked, I think it's the perfect time to matchmake the UFC lightweight division. There's a ton of fights that we need to see. There's a few title fights, number one contender fights, a bunch of banger matchups that I think make the most sense, and fights that the fans would want to see, not fights that are kind of second thought fights, like real fights that the fans want to see, because there's nobody booked. The only dude in the 15 rankings of the lightweight division is Bobby Green, so we need to make some fights. I've match-made every single lightweight. Well, not every single one of the lightweights, but most of the lightweight rankings are matched up against each other. And I haven't done McGregor and Chandler because I assume that's going to be at 170, which is why I haven't included those guys. But we'll start off with the title picture. Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan for the belt. This should be next. I've done it at UFC 308 in Abu Dhabi because it's pretty much been confirmed that UFC 308 is going to be in Abu Dhabi. And obviously, unless it's going to be Ankalaev versus Ferreira, which is very unlikely considering Ferreira said he wants to take a break. And because Ankalaev doesn't really deserve a home crown advantage when he hasn't fought for the belt. Well, he has fought for the belt before and he didn't win it, so it should be Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, unless they do Gamrot, because I know Arman Tsarukyan, he got suspended and fined for that fan altercation, and there's a lot of controversy over whether he's going to be able to fight. I think he is going to be able to fight for the belt, as long as he does this anti-bullying thing. So I'm pretty confident that we are going to see Makhachev versus Tsarukyan. And it is next in line. I mean, Tsarukyan's last few fights, he's definitely earned a title shot. Beat Oliveira, who was the number one guy in the division if you take away Makhachev. He KO'd Beneil Dariush in that first round. And he's just put together a really good streak as Arman Tsarukyan. And he is probably the biggest threat to Islam Makhachev at 155. I'm not saying I think he beats him. I still think Islam Makhachev runs through him. But if you look at the rest of the contenders, stylistically, Tsarukyan's probably the biggest test out of all of them. So I think we should do Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, and it's kind of like the fight where if Islam Makhachev can beat Arman Tsarukyan, I mean, I guess unless he fought Gamrot, he's kind of cleared out the division already. He beat Bobby Green, he beat Dan Hooker, beat Volkanovski twice, beat Charles Oliveira, beat Poirier, and if he can beat Arman Tsarukyan as well for the second time, it's going to get to the point where we start talking about Makhachev potentially moving up to 170, so I think Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan, it makes the most sense. It's a title fight we all want to see, and like I said, if Arman Tsarukyan's unavailable, I guess we're going to have to chuck Gamrot in there, but I've already got a fight booked for Gamrot, which I think makes the most sense. So UFC 308, main event for the Abu Dhabi card this year on October 26th. Give Arman Tsarukyan his title shot. Islam Makhachev, Arman Tsarukyan, UFC 308. And then for the number one contender fight, Charles Oliveira versus Mateusz Gamrot. Gamrot's also in this weird position where I'll talk about his record in a second, but I think this fight makes a lot of sense. I mean, you look at Charles Oliveira, he's practically lost to everyone above him. Well, when I say above him, I mean number one and the champion. And then he's beaten everyone else. Lost to Arman Tsarukyan, lost to Islam Makhachev, but he's beaten Gatei, Poirier, Chandler, and Dariush, with the only guy that he hasn't beaten or fought being Mateusz Gamrot. So I think it makes the most sense. And Gamrot, like I said before, is on this weird streak where he's on this massive streak of wins, with the only loss in between being to Beneil Dariush. But there are some tricky fights in there. The Arman Tsarukyan fight was a controversial win. The Jalen Turner fight was a split decision. He couldn't even beat Rafael dos Anjos. The Figueiredo fight ended in an injury. And even though he has got these flashy, well, he's got a lot of wins on his name right now, he needs that one big win that can guarantee him a title shot, because I feel like he's lacking that one big win. A decision win over Rafael dos Anjos, in my opinion, doesn't give you the title shot. So I think if he can beat Charles Oliveira, who, like I said, is one of the best in the division, a former champion, I think that should guarantee Gamrot the title shot that he wants. And for Charles Oliveira, I mean, he could arguably make a case to say that he deserves a title shot if he beats Gamrot, because the fight with him and Tsarukyan wasn't that dominant for Tsarukyan. It was a fairly close, I wouldn't say it was a close fight, I would have given it to Tsarukyan, but it wasn't like a dominating fight that he lost to Tsarukyan. So if he can beat Gamrot as well, who's on a bit of a streak, I don't mind the idea of Oliveira getting a title shot next against Islam Makhachev, or obviously Tsarukyan if he wins, assuming that he's not going to 170 immediately. So I think Charles Oliveira versus Gamrot makes the most sense. And I've also done it on the John Jones card for UFC 309 because number one contender fight, Oliveira versus Gamrot, it's a fun fight. And I also think it's fun in the aspect that Charles Oliveira notoriously has struggled with wrestlers. He struggled with Makhachev, he struggled with Arman Tsarukyan, and now we're giving him another wrestler. But I feel like out of all the wrestlers, Tsarukyan and Makhachev, Gamrot's probably the most winnable. So I think Charles Oliveira versus Gamrot definitely is the fight to make next. UFC 309, somewhere on the card, makes the most sense. For the next fight I've gone for, it's Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier 3. There's multiple reasons why I think this should be next. The first one, it's reliable. You know it's going to be a good fight. You don't even have to, do this is just guaranteed a fun fight. We've seen it 2 times before. Both of them have performed, and the reason I've done it on a bit of a weird date, UFC 311, 312, which is next year, is because I don't think Gaethje's going to be ready to fight this year. Poirier is probably fine to fight later this year, but Gaethje after UFC 300, that fight with Holloway, not sure he's going to be ready to fight this year, so I'm going to give him his time off, let him recover this year, and then next year, potential non-title fight pay-per-view main event, Justin Gaethje versus Dustin Poirier. Poirier's beaten him before, Gaethje's beaten him before, they both finished each other, and I feel like they're both in a spot where they've got a lot of similarities. You look at Gaethje and Poirier, they've both lost to Oliveira for the belt, they've both lost to Khabib for the belt, and you go even further recently, both coming off finishes recently. Poirier got finished by, well, obviously got finished by Makhachev, but got finished by Gaethje himself by KO. Justin Gaethje got finished by Holloway by KO. They've both fought up-and-comers. Gaethje beat Fiziev, Poirier beat Benoit Saint-Denis. They're both 1-1 against each other. It's the perfect time to make this fight. They've got a lot of similarities. They're just two legends in the lightweight division. They don't need to fight any other up-and-comers. Neither of them are going to get a title shot again, let's be for real. They've both had enough title shots now. The title aspirations are over. I think they should be used for fun fights. Potential retirement fight for both of them. I mean, Poirier is definitely hinted towards retirement. Poirier, Gaethje, main event next year, one final fun fight between the two of them. I think that's a perfect pay-per-view main event for a non-title fight. Or you can even have it as a really stacked co-main event for a stacked card. So, Gaethje, Poirier, sometime next year, I think that's the fight we should make for both of them, rather than feeding them to a killer or feeding them to an up-and-comer. They've been around for a long time. They've fought the killers. They've fought the prospects. Put them against each other. Have a fun fight. I think it makes the most sense. This one's kind of been announced already. But Renato Moicano versus Benoit Saint-Denis, I agree with this fight. I mean, it's not been official by the UFC, but it's been heavily confirmed this is going to be for UFC Paris, and I like the main event. Obviously, we're all expecting Cyril Gane to fight in Paris, but I like this fight as well. Renato Moicano needs a big opportunity if he beats Benoit Saint-Denis. He beat Brad Riddell, which is a bit of a mid-win, but then he beat Drew Dober and UFC 300 when he beat Jalen Turner in that comeback. If he can beat Benoit Saint-Denis on French soil in a main event, Renato Moicano might arguably deserve a big fight from this, like maybe a Beneil Dariush or maybe even somebody above him. And then for Benoit Saint-Denis, he had a really good run up to the Poirier fight, beating guys like Moises and Frivola. Got, you know, quote-unquote fraud-checked by Poirier. And now he needs a fight that's a little bit of a step down in competition. It's the perfect fight to make. Like I said, it's already been pretty much announced for UFC Paris. And I think it's a good fight. I think it'll be an absolute war. Both of them are really good grapplers. I think Benoit Saint-Denis definitely is the best striker of the two of them. But it's winnable for both of them. It's a big opportunity for both of them. And I like the fight a lot. Winner can get a big fight in the lightweight division. Like I said, maybe someone around that top 5 area. And then the next fight I think we should make is Rafael Fiziev versus Dan Hooker. First reason, I mean, both of them are coming back from injuries. Rafael Fiziev obviously got injured against Gamrot. He's been out for ages, and I think he should be returning either early 2025 or at least later this year. And then for Dan Hooker, I mean, he came off the win over Jalen Turner, but he got injured in that fight, and he's been out for over a year now. His last fight was at UFC 290 since that fight with Jalen Turner because he's been recovering. Both of these guys are wanting to come back. Both of these guys need to come back for the UFC. Now, I've booked it for UFC 305. Maybe that's too short of a notice for Rafael Fiziev, considering that he is just coming back from an injury. And it's not even, I mean, it's less than a month away from UFC 305. So maybe that's too short notice. But I think it's a really fun fight, this. Imagine how fun this fight would be. Dan Hooker just comes to bang every single time. Dan Hooker's one of those fighters that he's barely in a boring fight. And when he's facing Rafael Fiziev, who's one of the most fun strikers in the lightweight division, this would be a bloody war. They'd probably both find a way to make them have a massive layoff because of how bloody and violent this fight would be. If you don't want to do it for UFC 305, have it as a fight night main event later this year. It's again one of those fights that is guaranteed violence. It'd be such a fun fight, and I think it's a big opportunity for both of them. I mean, Fiziev's on a 2-fight losing streak to Gaethje, who's one of the best, and he got injured against Gamrot. Hooker's on a 2-fight winning streak. Again, it's one of those fights where the winner of this fight can get a big opportunity. It's a banger. They're recovering from injuries. I want to see both of them fight again because, you know, they've been out for ages. Comeback fight for both of them. Fun fight. There's no reason why any MMA fan wouldn't want to see this fight. So let's do Rafael Fiziev versus Dan Hooker. Potential fight night main event. If not, you wanted to be risky, do it for UFC 305 and stack that card. The next fight I've got, Jalen Turner versus Diego Ferreira. Jalen Turner keeps fumbling his fights. Obviously, he had that fight with Dan Hooker, and it was a very close fight for UFC 290. Obviously, that was the most recent fight for Dan Hooker. Then he had one of the most brutal finishes in UFC history against Bobby Green. And then at UFC 300, fumbled the win against Renato Moicano. We could be seeing Jalen Turner getting a big fight now if he didn't fumble that finish over Renato Moicano. Ended up getting finished himself. And he deserves to pay for it now, man. I mean, if losing to Moicano weren't enough, he doesn't really deserve a ranked opponent at this point in time for losing to Moicano. And plus, he's already fought a lot of the guys as well. So I think let's introduce Diego Ferreira to the rankings. Now, Ferreira has also lost to a few ranked guys. He lost to Gamrot, he lost to Dariush, but he's on a 2-fight winning streak. And in his last 2 fights, he's looked amazing. KO'd Michael Johnson out stiff. Fought Rumbetske, absolutely battered him as well. He needs a ranked fight. Jalen Turner can be the guy to welcome Diego Ferreira into the division. He's such a fun fighter as Diego Ferreira, and I know I've said this about a few fights already, but this really would be the epitome of violence. Bloody, it's going to end in a finish, I can almost guarantee. And if Jalen Turner can beat Diego Ferreira, then from there we can see Jalen Turner against another ranked lightweight. I think it's the perfect fight. Probably a fight night main event. I don't really know when. Maybe not even a main event because I'm not sure Jalen Turner deserves a main event opportunity. But, you know, somewhere on a fight night or a pay-per-view, I don't really care what card it's on. I just want to see the fight. And to be honest, I just want to see Diego Ferreira get a ranked opponent. So, Jalen Turner, let him be the guy to welcome Diego Ferreira to the rankings. I think that should be next. And then for the final fight, Rafael dos Anjos versus the winner of Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett. Rafael dos Anjos, he's on his last leg. I mean, it's not Arlovsky level washed. I mean, he has picked up a couple of wins, but he's definitely not looked great in his last few. He beat Brian Barberena, who's not even in the UFC anymore. He lost to Vicente Luque, and it wasn't even prime Luque. And then he got destroyed by Gamrot at UFC 299, I think it was. So I think he should face the winner of Bobby Green and Paddy Pimblett. Bobby Green, he got the really good win over Jim Miller after losing to Jalen Turner. If he can shut down the prospect of Paddy Pimblett, then I think Bobby Green versus Rafael dos Anjos is a fun fight. I mean, Rafael dos Anjos is ranked above Bobby Green. Bobby Green and dos Anjos haven't fought each other. I think it's a fight that probably makes the most sense next. And Bobby Green is fighting a legend who isn't as... I don't want to... Jim Miller's definitely not washed, but it's a more fresh fighter for Bobby Green. And if Paddy Pimblett can beat Bobby Green, I mean, that's a really good win for Pimblett, and it's going to get to the point where we have to start talking about difficult fights for Paddy Pimblett. If he can beat Bobby Green and enter the rankings, there's no more easy fights for Paddy Pimblett anymore. So why don't we give him a guy who's experienced in Rafael dos Anjos, a real test, a guy who's been around at the lightweight division for the longest time, and that's a real big test for Paddy Pimblett. And Rafael dos Anjos, he's been calling Paddy Pimblett out on Twitter multiple times. He wants the fight. So if Pimblett beats Bobby Green, or Bobby Green beats Paddy Pimblett, I think the winner should face Rafael dos Anjos. It's not an easy fight for dos Anjos, but at the same time, he is getting a step down in competition compared to what he's normally getting. And I mean, if Pimblett can beat Green and Green can beat Pimblett, I think it is the fight that we should make next. But that is how I would rank the UFC lightweight division and how I would matchmake the UFC lightweight division. Let me know your thoughts on these fights, if you would switch any fights around and just your overall thoughts. But thank you for watching.